Hello, hello. It's Veronica, the heart dietitian. Thanks for joining me today. We're talking all about intermittent fasting and heart disease. So there was some new development. I don't know if you've heard about the new research that was released. I think it was March 18th, 2024. It was an abstract that was presented at the American Heart Association, and their study of 20,000 individuals living in the United States who were intermittent fasting had showed that they were at 91% increased risk of cardiovascular death, which is extremely significant. So obviously this abstract and research study made headlines, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. But first, before we jump into that study, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background of what intermittent fasting is, kind of the research that has happened before this new study came out, and then we'll dive into the new study, the study principles, what that result means for individuals who are intermittent fasting. So stay tuned. I have a presentation deck that I'll share and we'll get to it. Okay, so I put together some slides here just so that we have some context of what intermittent fasting is. So I hope this helps with the visual as I'm talking, but basically intermittent fasting is basically you have a window of time where you eat and then a window of time where you don't eat. So alternates periods of eating and not eating. When an intermittent fasting diet, there are no constraints of what to eat. It's just when you eat. And I think that's pretty important, right? We know a lot of research about the benefits of nutrients to eat, of nutrients maybe to not eat as much of. And this diet only talks about fasting or giving your body a break from eating and digestion. So that is a unique aspect of this way of eating. And there's also different forms of intermittent fasting. So there's something called an alternate day fasting, where you fast for a day, a whole day, you only drink water, and then the next day you eat and then you continue. So you alternate days of eating, feast days and non-feast days. There's also a modified alternate day fasting where you eat 25% of your energy needs on those days as like your fasting day. So you don't fast and have nothing to eat, but you fast by only having about 500 calories or so. There's the 5-2 diet. So that means you feast or you eat for 5 days, and then you have that modified fasting diet for 2 days of the week. So you have a 25% of your calorie intake, about 500 calories a day for the other two. And then there's the time restricted eating, which I think is the most popular one that I see anyways in my clinic, is usually people are restricting their eating window to about 8 hours. So they eat for 8 hours and they fast for 16 hours. There's also 18-6, where you only eat for 6 hours and you fast for 18 hours. And then there's also a 4-hour eating window and 20-hour fast. So different ways to do it. But the most common is the 16 hours of fast and 8 hours of eating. So there is some intermittent fasting in heart health research. It is new, so we don't have a lot of long-term data to pull at, but I wanted to review what we have so far. So intermittent fasting became popular as a weight loss diet. So people lost weight, and some of these cardiovascular markers, such as reduced cholesterol, triglycerides, blood sugars, could have reduced as a result of just weight loss alone and not necessarily this fasting. So something else to keep in mind. And going forward, you can see here that there's the fasting and blood pressure research to say that when people are partaking in intermittent fasting, their systolic blood pressure, so that's the number at the top, and then the diastolic is the number at the bottom when you have a blood pressure reading. So the top number is when the heart's contracting and you're putting the most pressure on your artery walls during that time. So it's the larger number. So that number seems to reduce during periods of people doing the intermittent fasting. Further research suggests that this is only temporary, this benefit. So individuals who fast experience this, but if you ever stop the intermittent fasting diet, then your blood pressure would revert back to the way that it was before. So the benefits don't stay long term. And then there's also benefits to cholesterol levels. So you have your HDL, that's your healthy cholesterol. Think H as in healthy. So that's your high density and they report that the intermittent fasting doesn't really affect the HDL cholesterol levels. Your LDL, your L is for lousy, so that's your bad cholesterol. And there has been studies to show that you do have a reduction of the LDL cholesterol levels. But I think the most impact actually comes from reducing your triglycerides intake, or sorry, not intake, your overall triglyceride levels. So studies do show significant reduction in triglycerides, which is also important for preventing cardiovascular events. Although they are unclear if the results of the reduction of triglycerides are from weight loss or are they a result from participating in intermittent fasting. And then there is a lot of research about intermittent fasting and blood sugar levels. So there were changes in fasting insulin, so improved insulin resistance, which means that the insulin that you have in your body that's circulating works better to do its job of bringing the blood sugar from the blood into the muscle cells so it doesn't stay in your blood for long periods of time. Again, not sure if the result is from the weight loss or the intermittent fasting diet alone. And then there's some data that says that it doesn't impact blood sugar levels. So something else to consider. And then there is the intermittent fasting and weight loss research to say that there was clinically significant weight loss that did occur over studies. And usually it occurred at the beginning, so within the first 6 months, but then after the effects of the weight loss kind of plateaued. So you don't continue with the weight loss, you just kind of stabilize. So it's unclear if the weight loss plateau is from your body adapting to this new way of eating and figuring out the new way of life, or is it the participants not following the intermittent fasting diet as well as they did in the first 6 months? A lot of the time when people start a new diet, they're gung ho and they follow it to a T, but then as time goes on, life happens and the diet isn't followed as well. There are a lot of research limitations. As I said, it's new research, so we don't have a lot of long-term data, a lot of short-term data, so we don't know what happens in the long term. If, as we saw with the weight loss, after 6 months you plateau, so what does that mean for your cardiovascular markers? And the other thing is varying participant ages, different health conditions going into research studies, as well as the sex. So a lot of research is done in men and not so much in the female population. So I guess that's what we know so far. There's some references from the studies that were presented. So take a look if that's something you want to look at. But I know you're interested in that new study that just came out about the increased risk of cardiovascular event. Remember, the individuals who were intermittent fasting were at 91% increased risk of cardiovascular death. Okay, and here's the exciting new research that came out from the American Heart Association. It was presented in a poster, which is here. So it's nice that we are able to see the poster. A lot of the time you have to be at the conference to see the poster, so it's great that they shared it. And you can see from a poster like this, you don't get as much information as you would as a research study. So there are some questions we still have, but let's go through some of the strengths of the study is that it was a pretty good sample size, 20,000 individuals living in the United States. That's pretty good. They were over the age of 20. The mean age was about 40 to 50, I'd say. And another really positive is that there's 50% of the participants were female and 50% were male. A lot of research, even the fasting research I just spoke about, they don't prioritize females. It's more difficult to recruit for females, and females have a lot of confounding variables with menstruation and hormones. So they haven't been studied as equals to men. So it is great to see that they are in the study. I guess one more positive of the study is that it was a long-term study. It was 8 years long, which is fantastic. A lot of the intermittent fasting research is short-term. So that is a really great sign. I really like that part of this research study. Some of the things that are being criticized about this research study is that we don't know what they ate. So yes, they were intermittent fasting, but I think it's really important to know exactly what participants were eating during this time, because if they were eating nutrients that put them at risk of an increased cardiovascular event, it makes sense that they would have an increased cardiovascular event, right? And same with if they weren't eating, or they were including a lot of heart protective foods, but doing the restrictive eating, and they had the high risk of the cardiovascular event that the study concluded, then that would be a totally different topic, right? So that's a big unknown that we don't know, and I'm hoping that will come out in further analysis of this study, which I'm hopeful for. So that's one big thing we don't know. The other thing that wasn't addressed is when the time restricted eating happened. So we know that they ate for 8 hours, but we don't know if that eating window was at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. And there is a significant difference to when you are eating, because, for example, if we're eating at the beginning of the day, that's helpful because when we wake up, we have lots of things to do. We're moving and we're thinking and we're using energy. So if we eat during that time of activity, then the food is utilized a lot more and not as much is stored as fat. If the eating window is at night, maybe when we're relaxing or we're sitting on the couch watching TV, reading a book, not as active, then our food is utilized differently, digested differently. And so that could put us at risk of cardiovascular event too. So that's another unknown that would be interesting to see the results of. So yes, we don't know all the answers from the study, but it is interesting because it's one of the only studies that is long term with that 8 years of research behind it. So excited to hear more of the details that come out from the further analysis. And I think most importantly, that even if you are engaging in intermittent fasting, you still need to eat heart protective foods to help prevent that cardiovascular event. So I hope that gives some summary of the findings that are presented here, gives you some context. Any comments, I would love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below.